Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Welcome to all of you who are participating in the live chat. Tonight, we are returning to the case of Ellen Ray Greenberg. We've covered this extensively. Obviously, you guys know that this is a very important case to me. Ellen was a 27-year-old school teacher living in the Manayunk neighborhood of Philadelphia when on January 26th of 2011, her life was taken. There has been a debate, obviously, about the manner in which she died, but recently, as you guys know, if you've been watching my channel, her parents won. I don't know, they settled with the city of Philadelphia, but one of the things that I would consider a win is they got the doctor who originally said that Ellen had taken her own life to reverse that. And to talk about this case, I want to welcome Julia Cowley. Julia, welcome. Welcome. I'm glad that you are here. Thanks for coming.
Hi, Gavin. Thanks for inviting me.
So you've been covering this case over on the Consult. You've been looking at it.
Yes, we have. It's in the process of being played right now. So we've gotten out 2 episodes out of a total of 4. If we get a lot of questions, concerns, we may do a 5th episode. So far, I don't see a 5th episode. So we're in the process of covering it. But really, the studying her case and doing the research was months in the making because there's a lot to review.
I love that. I love it because in my world on YouTube, we rush to get content out, right? I'm live streaming on the daily, and I sometimes long for the days when I first started looking at Ellen's case where it was a couple of months of looking at files before I think it was 2 weeks of just organizing files in the very beginning. So one of the things that I think that we should start out here with, Julia, is tell us about your background and how you came to the case, because you're going to be way different than me in that I have no training, I have no expertise, no bona fides on this. I'm just a talking head in Western Pennsylvania. When you learned about Ellen's case, well, tell us about your background first and how you kind of started jumping in.
Okay, well, I started my career in law enforcement as a forensic scientist with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. So in that role, I worked in the laboratory and I was also part of the violent crime response team. So we would go out to homicide scenes, we would process them, we would collect evidence. And then after being at TBI, I decided to join the FBI and I became an agent in 1999. Can't believe it's been that long. And I was assigned to white collar, which I expected, but I also thought, well, maybe I'll go to violent crime because I had such a strong violent crime background. So I did public corruption, civil rights cases for a number of years.
Did you do
which I
any
liked.
bank robbery stuff?
Oh, yeah. So I did a lot of bank robberies
Yeah.
as part of my role on the evidence response team. Because of my forensic background, I joined the evidence response team. My first office was Boston. Actually, my main office. I started in Boston. I ended in Boston. And so I was part of the evidence response team. So I did a lot of bank robberies in a role as a forensic examiner or forensic. I shouldn't even call myself forensic because I was just a crime scene team member at that point. I had with a forensic background. So, but I did cross over with bank robbery because I had a subject of one of my investigations who was very close with the bank robbers in the Boston area and that kind of some of the crews there. So we kind of exchanged information, but bank robberies
who I told you before was a special agent. He told me that everybody in the FBI has to put in their years in bank robbery. He's like, everybody has to do it. And, eventually you get to the spot where you really want to be. So that's why I'd asked.
That's funny because when I joined, everybody wanted to do bank robberies and be on the because it wasn't even though we called it the bank robbery squad, it was a violent crime squad. So they
Mm,
did other things other than bank robberies, but that was mostly what they did. I mean, the Boston division had a ton. They're known for it for their armored car robberies and bank robberies. In fact, they made a movie out of it, The
hmm,
Town, and that's based on, I don't want to say real events, but based on the types of crimes that were going on at the time. I mean, not quite to that extent, but well-known crews out of Charlestown and that area. So, but when I got into the FBI, you would be expected most likely to go to a white collar squad, and
okay.
it's all goes in, I guess, phases depending on what the priorities are. And the priorities at the time I joined were white collar priorities. Those were higher than violent crime. And of course, now it's terrorism. So that,
Mm.
and that will probably always be, that will never change at this point. But so I knew I would go to I figured
What,
I would go.
what took you into forensics in the first place? You started at TBI.
Oh, yeah.
What brought you into forensics in the first place?
Just my interest in true crime. I started
Really?
young reading. Yes, I read Helter Skelter is the first true crime book I ever read. My mother was reading it. She told me I wasn't allowed to read it, but when she was finished, I took it and read it, and I was just fascinated. And I knew at some point I want to try to solve murders. I just didn't know how I would do that
Is
or
is
what
Helter
that would
Skelter
look
like
like.
about the Manson
The
family?
Ma-
Is that what it is?
yeah, the
Okay.
Manson murders. And then back when I was in high school, we had these big books. They were like big phone books. We don't even have phone books anymore, but so that's how old I am.
Me too.
Um,
Yeah.
but these big books that had all these different lists of college majors, and I was going through it like basically page by page because I thought I don't like anything. I like sports because I did sports in high school, but I really didn't realize what else I liked, and I found police science. And I'm like, what is that? So I read the description. It was basically forensic science. I'm like, wait a second, I do like something else. I love this stuff. And it hit me. It's like I didn't realize that's what I do with all my free time. I'm reading true crime books. I'm fascinated by them. It's all I ever really wanted to do, other than a few other things like hang out with some friends. But that's what I did in all my free time. And it took me a while to figure out my path, like exactly how I would get there. But I majored in chemistry because I knew I wanted to be in a laboratory. So I majored in chemistry.
But
And
when you went to the FBI, you weren't in the lab, right? You were in the field. It
no,
seems.
I wasn't. I went from the lab with the state agency to the field, and I realized like I really enjoyed my work with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, but I was in the lab most of the time, and I really loved going out. Loved is not the right word, but going to crime scenes was what my passion was. I wanted to be out. And then I had a colleague that I really admired, and he joined the FBI a couple of years before me, and he really liked it. So I kind of followed in his steps and joined a few years after him. And I think I wanted to be in charge of my own investigations and not just be one piece of the puzzle, but bring all the pieces together and be more in charge and be out more talking to people and interviewing people and things like that. Because
Yeah.
I did like the lab work, but it was it became very repetitive for me.
Yeah. Okay. Now, well, I want to get back to the passion of going to the crime scene because, as you know, on Ellen's case, boy, have we got a crime scene. And I think there were some issues with the investigators that night at the crime scene that we can talk about a little bit here. But I want to understand another couple things. Okay, you go to the FBI, you're kind of transitioning from your lab work at TBI into field work. I'm guessing you still had some lab work or something. You had that chemistry background, but
Yeah.
help me understand the I guess the organization of the FBI. You called yourself an agent. We all hear the term special agent. Are they the same thing?
Yes.
Okay. What is a
Yes.
special agent?
That's the title. The special agent is the sworn law enforcement officer. So we have the well, I don't anymore, but I had the authority to enforce federal law. And why they ended up calling a special agent as versus an agent or investigator, I don't think I know the history of that, but
It was
special
probably
agent is
J.
just
Edgar Hoover wanted something special, right? So they said special.
yeah. And even at the TBI, I was sworn law enforcement. I my title there was special agent forensic
Hmm.
scientist. And but in that capacity, I didn't make arrests. I wasn't in charge of investigations. I didn't enforce the law. I worked in a laboratory, but I did go through training to become a special agent with TBI. I just had a different role. Now, in the FBI, the people in the laboratory, most of them are not special agents. They're not sworn enforcement. Some are, but the majority of them aren't. So I knew joining the FBI that I wanted to be a special agent. I wanted to be a field agent and investigator in, one of our 56 field offices somewhere,
Hmm.
hoping that it wasn't, you know, somewhere really bad. So
Where
I
would
got
be bad for
Boston.
you? What would bad
Oh, I
be?
don't want to insult anybody. I will tell you this. I am from the Northwest, and I was married when I joined the FBI. I'm still married to the same person, but my husband is from the East Coast. He did not want to be on the West Coast. And so the West Coast might not have worked for us. I mean, he would have gone and he would have loved it. No. But I think that my concern was, are we going to be assigned a place that he will be happy
Yeah,
because he was following me? So I think that was more of my concern than really anything else, because I do feel like I could live anywhere and make
yeah,
it work.
yeah.
So,
No, I've I've honestly never been anywhere in the world, and I've been everywhere in the world except Antarctica. I'm Johnny Cash. I have never gone anywhere in the world where I haven't said, "Man, this is beautiful. This is amazing." There really isn't a spot on Earth that isn't amazing in its own way. So, we've
yeah.
always been that way too. We'll go where the work takes us.
Yeah, that's how
Yeah,
I felt, and, even when I got to Boston, Boston's definitely, it's different from where I was from in the Northwest, and it's certainly different than Tennessee, but, having gone from the Pacific Northwest to Tennessee, that was a little bit of culture shock, but I loved Tennessee. I just loved it, and then
Tennessee's
going from
cool.
Tennessee, I just loved it there,
Yeah,
and it was a great experience. And then going from Tennessee to Boston was a culture shock. It took me a couple years to adjust to Boston, but once I adjusted, I absolutely loved it there as well, and I came back at the end of my career to retire in Massachusetts.
I love Boston. I don't know. I just nerd out about places like that have serious significance in American history. I remember I had a client out there, and he lived on like a boat in Boston Harbor, and I was like, "Holy crap! I'm in Boston Harbor right now." And then, go grab a bite to eat. I'm walking across the common right now, and it's a cool place.
Yeah, it really is. I loved the work that we did. I loved Boston. But again, it's just, some place that I never thought I'd be in my life, and I made the most of it and loved every minute, other than maybe my first 2 years. It was a rough. I think anytime you're a brand new agent in the field, it's not easy.
Yeah,
There's
I
I don't
bet.
want to say I don't want to say it's initiation, but it kind of is, because you join the FBI, and by the time people join the FBI, they're older. Many of them already have families and children, and they've already had successful careers, and they're leaving one career to go to another. And so you just
Oh,
feel like you're not a young person. I mean, you're young. Clearly, I was young compared to what I am now, but I had a very responsible career. All FBI agents do. You can't become a special agent unless you have full time work experience in addition to your education.
that's
And
interesting because
yeah,
my uncle, who of course, graduated college in the early 60s, so I mean, it's a different time, but He was recruited right out of college. Now,
Yeah,
he had
that's
spent some
I don't know
time
when
in
that
South
changed.
America. He had spent some time in South America volunteering. Uh, but yeah, he graduated from college, and then his first and only job for his entire career was the Bureau.
Yeah, I'm not sure when exactly it all changed. I just know, when I joined, that was the policy at the time. You had to have that experience. So I was 29 when I joined the FBI, and I felt you join and everyone just thinks you come in, you have this background, whatever your area you came from, whatever your prior career was, you have should have a very strong knowledge base in something, and then you're just treated like you don't know anything anymore.
Hmm.
So it's a little bit of an initiation. So first couple years are rough for a lot of people. You're adjusting to a new place, to you're on probation, and you have to do what people tell you to do,
Yeah.
and you're a lot of things are being thrown at you, and you're really treated like you know nothing, and you're like, wait a second, I actually know some stuff here.
Yeah.
So but after about 2 years you start to get your bearings, and you start to feel confident. You get off probation, and people start to get used to you in the office, and then really after about 5 years you're golden, you're good to go.
Okay, so let's talk about rolling up to crime scenes.
Okay.
Or I don't know. I mean, in the case of Ellen Greenberg, I don't know that police knew that they were rolling up to a crime scene necessarily. They definitely were rolling up to an emergency scene. There had been the 911 call. The EMS had arrived. The firefighters had arrived. Um, I'm trying to extend a little grace to the Philly PD here. Maybe I don't know, but they roll up to this scene, and well, let's do it this way. When you roll up to a crime scene, what? Tell me about the steps that you first take. What is that? What is
Okay.
that experience?
Now, and I'll speak from my experience, mostly at TBI. Obviously, we responded to crime scenes in the FBI, but sometimes those are very different than just, I say just, but they're not necessarily homicides all the time.
Right.
But in my role, we would get a call out. Now, most of the calls that we responded to were murders, and they were known to be murders. And usually they were whodunit murders. And there was a decision, much higher than my grade, made whether or not the crime scene team would be deployed. And, between, maybe the local chief or sheriff that's asking for assistance, and the director of the forensic division at TBI, they make a decision. Are we going to send out a whole team? Are we going to send out a couple people? So
So
most of the time we knew.
Is Tennessee the like Pennsylvania is like this? The state police have the forensic services unit.
Yeah,
No
so the
other little
Tennessee
town has that kind of thing.
Well, now in Tennessee, the bigger cities
Oh,
have
sure.
them.
Okay.
So Nashville, Knoxville, Memphis, Chattanooga. So, but the smaller towns. So most of the time, I say not all the time, because we did respond to scenes in the bigger cities in Tennessee occasionally, but mostly we were in the more rural areas or smaller towns that didn't have the resources. So, because the bigger cities handle their own, and Tennessee is they were the ones that had the crime scene units. Now there was at the time the Tennessee Highway Patrol. They handled the traffic and
Hmm.
vehicle matters, and then the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation handled the criminal matters. And so as part of that response, we would go most of the time, as I said, we'd know it was a homicide, but we'd also show up, and occasionally the investigators wouldn't know, or the police wouldn't know. And it would require investigation to ultimately make that determination. So responding to something like that's equivocal, it was our procedure to process it as a crime scene. We've been called out, and we are going to process it exactly. And even, we may even there. I mean, there was one case, and I wasn't on that crime scene, but my colleagues went out, and it was equivocal death. They didn't know, but it ended up being the person took their own life.
Okay.
And it was still processed as a crime scene. They knew that pretty early. The crime scene team, because the initial responders didn't disturb the scene. They didn't go in too much. But once forensics went in, they found some things. They realized, okay, this is likely not a homicide. But they still processed it. That was our procedure.
Okay. When you say
So
they still processed it, that means, okay, we believe that this victim did it to themselves here, but let's gather all the evidence that, like, there's photographs, there's DNA or blood or whatever. You go through as if it is a homicide, even though you suspect it is not.
correct. That was our procedure.
Okay.
I can't speak for other departments' procedures. And I'll tell you, in the FBI, I responded to an equivocal death scene, and it was in a VA facility. And we got there and quickly, because nobody wanted to touch anything, which was good. So they called out the FBI because it was on the VA, because it was in the VA facility. And we quickly determined that it was also this person took their own life. And there were just something, again, we went in there and we were able to, document and see some things that by going, you know, into the scene, we could see that maybe people who didn't go into the scene could not see at the time. And we still processed the whole scene. And what I mean by processing, we document it with sketches, photographs, video. We take notes as well. What do we see? We gather items that might be relevant to the case. And even though we were certain that this person took their life, it was still a process to go through. And we took his electronic, he had a phone. We took his phone, and we were able to get messages that he had sent to a relative. And so it took a while, but overall, we eventually realized, okay, our initial assessment was correct. And the medical examiner as well, the following day, had done the autopsy and determined it was self-inflicted wounds. And
Okay. So you mentioned a couple things that you did as a matter of procedure, of process, that didn't really happen here with Ellen Greenberg, right?
right,
The glaring thing, and I don't want to get too far ahead, but most of the people that are watching this know this case really well. I've done like
right,
60 episodes on this thing. Uh, Glaringly, all of the electronics were left in the apartment, and the following day, a family member, a guy named James Schwartzman, removed them and took them to his home. And it wasn't until the day after that that police went and retrieved them from him. Of course, the timeline being everybody on scene thinks that Ellen did this to herself, and again, Mooney is one of my OGs. She's saying no grace for let me hide this, or I've got so many things. She's like, no grace for Philly PD, but we want to be fair about. I mean, it just doesn't do any good to be like unfair about this kind of thing. So I'm in the crime scene photos, which were taken by the medical examiner's investigator, guy named Olszewski. There is a photo of him lifting up Ellen's shirt, kind of like just under her bust, and then you can see a couple of what he thought were hesitation wounds. And in also fairness to them, not a lot of blood at the scene. It wasn't something out of Dexter or anything. It was most of the blood that she lost was internal. And so I think they came to the conclusion pretty darn quickly, and I'm not saying correctly, but I think they did it correct quickly, that Ellen had done this to herself. It wasn't until the following day that the medical examiner was like, "Y'all didn't see this back here. This is definitely a homicide." And by the time they went back to investigate further, the place had been cleaned up. So I mean, as a matter of process, Julia, do you think that, I mean, do you see problems with the process that the Philly PD followed, at least as they documented it? I know that you went through the lawsuits and got all of that stuff. Do you see any problems there? And if so, what were they?
I don't know how the determination was made, even by the description you just provided with lifting up her shirt. I've seen the wounds. I don't know how you determine it. You may be able to say, okay, those are superficial, but you still don't really know. You don't know how deep they are. An autopsy needs to be done. And to just say, well, they're hesitation wounds, to classify them as that, and therefore it must be a suicide, I think that is a mistake. I think it's a leap. And even if they are hesitation wounds, it doesn't mean they're self-inflicted hesitation wounds. Hesitation wounds can be inflicted by another person, or they could be accidental in the victim is moving around and you don't get a good, I guess, blow, so to speak. So to just say these are hesitation wounds, therefore, I think they were heavily influenced by the information provided by the significant other, being Sam Goldberg.
Yeah.
I think there maybe was confirmation bias. Oh, this door was locked. It was definitely locked. And then you have some misinformation getting passed around or misunderstood about somebody was there with him when the door was broken through. I mean, I just think that became confirmation bias. Okay, she had to have done this. And then you're looking at those wounds and thinking to yourself, oh, those look superficial to me. Therefore, they must be hesitation wounds. Therefore, she had to have done this to herself because she's the only one supposedly here in the apartment. That is a grave error, in my opinion, to make that leap prior to really examining and prior to autopsy. I know I could say this to my, there's a lot of times where you say, well, you don't know what you would have done in the situation. I do know. If I had seen those wounds, even just on the front, because as you and I had talked about the other day, where it's not clear anyone at the scene knew the wounds to the back of her head.
Yeah.
But even when you're looking at just the front of her and you're trying to determine, okay, these are hesitation and this is a deeper wound, but you also have to take into account the orientation of these wounds. And they're at different orientations, and the different orientations do suggest or are more suggestive of a homicidal attack. That's just her front. And I'm not just making this up. The research points to this. And one of the things we did in looking at this case, because I have seen a lot of strange things in my career, because, when I was at the behavioral analysis unit, we saw the strangest things, and we saw things that were, you just think someone couldn't do to themselves. We saw a lot of equivocal death cases. So certainly at first blush, hearing about this case 20 times to the back of the head, I don't want to say it's easy, but I think just kind of common sense, you think, well, that's unusual. It
Mm-hmm.
is unusual, right?
Sure.
Anecdotally or just by common sense, we know it's unusual, but really, how unusual is it? So let's look at what research tells us. So one of the things we did is it did a meta-analysis. We looked at research where they had done comprehensive look at the research for sharp force injuries in homicides and self-inflicted wounds,
So there
where
is an
somebody
academic
died.
literature that you can go to for these. Is that what you're
I
kind of
do.
describing?
Yes, academic literature, like where people have done studies about, okay, how do you differentiate between homicidal wounds and self-inflicted wounds, and what is more likely? So first of all, I'm going to say when we profile a case, it's all based on probabilities and what is most probable. And it doesn't mean that that is exactly what happened. So profiling is not an exact science. No two criminal acts are the same. No two criminals are the same. Human behavior can be very complex. but we do have to rely on something. So we do go to the literature. And I pulled a number of research articles. And in this meta analysis that was done very recently, there are just all these different criterias they went through to show, okay, what is more likely to be seen in somebody in self-inflicted sharp force injuries that cause death, and what is more likely in homicidal attacks. And so many people just say, well, the front, she had these hesitation wounds. But when you really look at those wounds and you apply the research, you basically come up with the the orientation of the wounds, the position of the wounds are more indicative, according to research, of a homicidal attack. So it doesn't matter if they're just superficial. You can't say those are hesitation wounds. The hesitation, if they were, the superficial wounds are not statistically on the places where you would normally see hesitation wounds.
Where would you normally see those?
You'd usually, statistically, not all the time, you'd see them on the anterior portion of the neck. You see on the wrists, you see sometimes on the arms.
I see.
Mostly, you will see them in the chest and the abdomen as well. So it's not completely unheard of that someone will self-inflict something to their chest or their abdomen. Usually, when it's in the abdomen, they really are aiming for the heart, and the abdomen actually goes up much higher than what people think. But there have been deaths where people have stabbed themselves in the abdomen, that in the lower region of the abdomen. But when you start kind of piecing together all the research, and that's just the front of her, right? When
Right.
then you go to the back, and when you see attacks to the head and to the nape of the neck, that is strongly correlated with a homicidal attack. So now you have the front that's already, I wouldn't say real strongly correlated, but more correlated statistically with a homicidal attack. Then you add the back wounds that's strongly, and then you kind of start looking at some of the other research, and that's how I approached it, and that's how my colleagues and I were talking about this. Is it, of course, the question comes up: is it possible? Could she have inflicted all these wounds to herself? So we disagreed on this, but I felt that I thought it was possible. And I just mean possibly, I say possibly physically possible. Now, do I think it's plausible? I do not. Now, another one of my colleagues just felt very strongly it is impossible. And, but he's not a doctor either, nor am
Yeah.
I. But is it plausible? It's not. And when you really start piecing all this together, and there's a whole different,
Well,
or a whole, oh,
Dr.
go ahead.
Dr. Osborne said in his deposition that he felt that it was possible. And that's actually what inspired me to go, oh, well, Kimberly is 5'7", and Kimberly weighs about the same as, so I took my wife. She was such a good sport, and we're like, tried to do this. Now, people told me later on, well, what if she bent over and did it that way? And, what if she wasn't just trying to reach back behind herself? And yeah, so I have come to the conclusion myself as well. It's like, I guess it's possible. I guess that you could mount a knife to a wall and like lean into it, or I guess there's the possibility there, but the probability is so low. It's just,
Right.
I,
Exactly. And I'm not somebody who uses absolutes, so I'm very cautious with my words. So when I say it's not possible, do I think it I'm just very careful with what I say. Is it possible? Could she have done each and every one of those wounds to herself? Yes. Would it have required dexterity? Yes. Would it have required turning the knife in different orientations? Yes. So, but is it possible? Yes. Is it plausible? Not in my opinion. And then factoring in research on top of it. I mean, generally sharp force injury as a way to end your life is rare. It's more rare for even with women. And so here you go again, starting to get, it just becomes less and less likely, you know, looking just at this evidence, that she did this to herself. They even looked at notes. How often
It's all
are
right.
notes left? I apologize.
It's okay.
This research was saying anywhere between 18 to 50% of the time. So just, notes are not always left. In this particular case, we did see in the documentation that it was observed by, now this of course is the day of the search warrant, so it was the 28th, so a couple
Yeah.
of days after her death. But now it was documented that there was blood on pillows in the bedroom.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
now I don't know how you can just say it's blood. I would have called it a reddish brown stain until you can
Yeah.
confirm it
With the
with
appearance
testing.
of blood. Yeah.
Yeah. But significant. And and that also is, significant statistically, because when you have a sharp force death, or a death, by sharp force injury, and there is blood located a distance from the actual scene where the body is, becomes even statistically more likely it was a homicide. So you're just piling on all these statistics of
Yeah.
what's more likely. And, having come from a very strong science background, that that has meaning to me. It doesn't necessarily, I can look at it from my own experience, from my crime scenes that I've been to, the anecdotally that I've seen, all the consultations I participated when I was in the FBI's behavioral analysis unit. I can say this is unusual. I've never seen this like this. I can say that, but going out and looking at all the research that's been done and applying it has meaning to me, and it just informs my ultimate opinion. And so that's how we took the approach initially to this case. That's what we really wanted to look at it first.
Can I go back to the rolling up to the crime scene thing? Something that
Sure.
just occurred to me. So,
Sorry, I get off on statistics like that,
no,
and I
no,
go
this
on
is
a
brilliant. I
tangent.
love this. I love this. But, well, one thing before, well, no, there are two things that I want to know. First is somebody like Mr. Olszewski, who is working as a medical examiner's investigator. I mean, was he a former police officer, some kind of medico-legal death investigator? I mean, what does it take to become a medical examiner's investigator as opposed to like a detective at a police force? Do you know?
I don't know. I don't
Okay,
know the training, and I know that not every state has investigators assigned to their medical examiner's office. I know in the
right.
states that I've lived in, they haven't had that. So I don't know what the training is or what the qualifications are to have that position.
Okay. The reason I'm thinking in this vein. Okay, what my hobby, you talked about your hobby being true crime. My hobby is not true crime. My hobby is I'm a pilot. I love aviation. I love everything aeroplane. From the time I was a little kid, my dad was worked in rocketry, and in the Cold War, he was one of the guys that designed and worked on missiles and all that. I mean, airplanes were just everywhere. So that's who I am, right? There are certain aircraft that I've got hundreds of hours in that if I want to do my pre-flight check, I can probably do it with my eyes closed. However, I never do, ever. I always take my checklist and I start at the front and I go all the way around checking off my checklist. So that when you were talking about rolling up to a crime scene and having a process, it just reminded me of a process of things that are life and death, right? If I miss something on an airplane, it could be something on, say, on one of the control surfaces. If I miss that there's a nut that has come off on the tie rod or something like that, which is something that does happen, I could be in the air and have no control of my plane, and I could lose my life. So it's life and death, right? So I mean, when I start at the prop and I go all the way around, I do it with a book in my hand. The I can't even stress this enough. I've got hundreds of hours in these certain different airplanes that, um, I mean, it's tempting not to. It's tempting to just go, I can do this, do it really fast. But I never, ever, ever, ever do. Um, I kind of feel like that's the way a crime scene should be. That there
It
should
is that
be.
way.
Okay.
I used so
Okay.
yeah, so the process. So I used to teach the evidence response team units as well. I was an instructor at the FBI laboratory for about a year, and it, you get really good when you teach it too. I think you have a good understanding of it more so than when you actually do it sometimes. So not only did I do it, I taught it, and then I went back out and did it again. But there is a process, and there's, the FBI has a 12-step process, and not every not every step will be done in that process all the time. It really depends on your crime scene, but there are certain things that have to be done. And first of all, securing your scene, and and that is basically putting up your crime scene tape or determining what your scene is. Usually, you arrive to a scene and you realize I have to expand this because sometimes when initial responders arrive, they just put it up around the very
Mm-hmm.
small portion, but you always want to extend it out in case there's additional evidence, and you want to make sure you have enough room to work. And documenting the scene is really important. Doing the initial walkthrough, having an understanding and of what the scene consists of, and noting important pieces of evidence, trying to note, is there anything that could be easily lost or destroyed, documenting with photographs and keeping a photo log, taking notes. I mean, all of this is documented. Seeing crime scene sketch, a hand sketch, and this is at least the FBI's policy, and this is also what I did in my prior job. We do a hand sketch, and there may be
Kind of like
digital.
bird's
You
eye
may
view of this is the scene kind of
Yeah,
thing.
and it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be an artist to do it, but you need to document with a sketch. You need to do measurements with that as well. And I know that seems to be, you want to have your hand sketches to back up any potential digital um, diagrams you may end up making in the future, or even then sometimes they do it right then. But just hand sketching the scene, that's all part of documenting it, because you can never get that scene back, ever. Even if you close it up and walk away for 10 minutes, you, you've lost control of that scene. You no longer can say you have chain of custody if you find something else there. So it's a one-time deal, and you need to make sure that you're thorough and document everything and take everything. The other things, I mean, the other steps include looking for or documenting certain types of evidence, and not every crime scene will have certain things that you have to be concerned about at your scene. But one of the most important things at the end is like the final walkthrough and making
Okay.
sure you go through, did we get everything? Did we not miss anything? And going through all your pieces of evidence and making sure that your evidence collection log matches your item that you've collected, whether it's in a bag or however you've collected that particular item of evidence. Does it match up? Does it say what's on it? Is it properly secured? Do you have two signatures? Do you have two witnesses that saw you collect it? It's really hard. It's a lot of work, even
Okay.
for a small scene to do. But it's still, every scene has to be done the same way, because one of the things we have to remember, as whether we're working in a laboratory or we're investigators, you have to have a standard operating procedure, and you need to do things the same way every time, because you're going to do hundreds of scenes in your career, and you're not always going to remember every little thing. And that's why you're documenting it well, so you can go back and refresh your memory. But if you're ever questioned, well, did you do this? Maybe you specifically can't remember doing it, but if you say, well, yes, because I do that every single time, I have a standard operating procedure, and I know that I did this because it's documented right here,
Well,
then
that is one of the things then that is. I hadn't thought in these terms. Number one, and I have thought about this, but number one is the police never took photographs of this scene. The only photographs that exist in this scene are from the medical examiner's investigator. And number two, in any case that I cover in my day job, I'm going to court and they're showing the crime scene. It looks like they did it in Hollywood. They've got the little tent cards, they've got little measuring sticks, they've got they've I mean they are identifying different things in the crime scene. They're putting a, tag on it, a number on it, whatever. And none of that happened in any of the photos in Ellen's crime scene. One of the things that is glaring is there is a footprint in the blood next to one of her hips, like in between her arm and the hip. There is it's a footprint, and it
Is
does
it on
kind of
her right side?
it is on her right side. Yeah,
Because that's where she has bruising.
yeah, she does on her hip. She has big bruising there. Yeah,
May or may not be related, but that's why
right.
you process it as a crime scene.
Yeah. So, and none of that was marked. None of it was marked, measured, photographed. At least there's no evidence that it was, because by the time the police came back 2 days later, it had already been cleaned up.
Right. Yeah. So when you're documenting the scene as well, it's just not a matter of just taking a bunch of photos and throwing some numbers down. There's a process. You take overall photos. So you're photographing the scene as you found it without disturbing it. If there's anything that has been disturbed prior to your arrival, you need to make note of that. And like, this is not in its original position, or this was left by medics, or you document all that to say, I didn't disturb this. And then you take, dependent, like, let's say you're taking overall scene, and let's say you're working your way toward a piece of evidence. So you take a medium range photograph, and then you take a close up, and then you take a close up with measurement with a ruler or something. That is the process for every single item of evidence. So you can imagine how many photos should be taken at
Yeah.
every scene. And that's the way it should be done.
Yeah.
And
No, no, there's a
therefore, they
case
get
that
an
I
idea. Yeah, you get an idea of how the scene looked and where the evidence is in relation to that scene, and in relation to, if you have a victim there, in relation to the victim.
there's another case that I think I told you about. It's Amanda Winkowski in Buffalo, New York, where the city came to the conclusion that she overdosed. She was not a victim of homicide. However, in that file, there are over 600. I don't remember the exact number, but there are over 600 crime scene photos. There are hundreds of autopsy photos. In Ellen's case, put it all together, there might be 100 photos, most of them autopsy. So, yeah, I just feel like, when the appellate court in this case, when Josh and Sandy were asking the court to force the medical examiner's office to change the manner of death, and that got up to the appellate level, the appellate court on standing, basically the appeal by the city was these people don't have standing for their daughter. And the appellate court agreed. And they wrote a paragraph about that long, which was their opinion. And then they wrote 30 pages of how disgusted they were at just how badly it was investigated. They had to do something like that. I think anybody with any expertise or experience in crime investigation would look at this file and just shake their head. I can't believe these people did this.
When I started my career in the early 90s, it's hard to believe. um, and I was in training, and they would say that the people that I was working with in the laboratory that were the experts and seniors to me, they would always say, film is cheap. Take as many photographs as possible. And of course, back then used film, and
It was film. Yeah.
yeah, it was film, but even now it's easier, so take
Yeah.
as many as you need. Film is cheap. Never think you have enough. Because sometimes you don't always know what could be important. You investigation may come up with something additional. Autopsy may come up with something additional, and then you go back to your photographs, you go back to your evidence that you collected, and you're like, okay, what is the meaning of that? So just taking the photographs, document everything possible, then you have it and you have it forever. Whereas, once you leave, like I said, you cannot go back.
Yeah, it's done.
So it is done, even for the shortest amount of time, because one thing that's also really important is chain of custody. And you know, would you be able to say, oh, I just left 10 minutes ago, I'm just going back? Well, yeah, likely no one disturbed it, but can you say that with certainty? No.
Right. Yeah.
So make sure you have it all. But photographs are really important, and you take, especially nowadays, you can put them all together and do a whole room and a panorama, and it is so important to help tell the story. And many times the crime scenes are not available to juries to see, or to other people that are coming in later to investigate the case if the case doesn't get solved. So what you want to do is you want to be able to show what did it look like, and if you had to go back and recreate it, where exactly was that piece of evidence? Exactly. You need to be able to put it back. And that's why you take measurements and document everything as precisely as possible. It is hard work. It is a lot of work. It is very detailed work. It it's exhausting, but it has to be done because you never get another chance.
Yeah, when you leave a crime scene after something like that, is that a time where you just want to just like lay down and just turn off the world for a minute? I bet you're
Oh, yeah.
tired.
Well, usually you have to go back to the laboratory and submit everything. You can't just take it home with you, so you have to go
Yeah.
back. You still so what even when you're done with a crime scene, you still have a long night ahead of you. You got to get the evidence put into the evidence file to where, so it's still a lot to do, some paperwork to do. But yeah, once you're done, you're very exhausted. But I'll tell you, there's always that feeling of, I hope I didn't miss anything. That's why you do the final walkthrough. And, there's a old, this is from a long time ago. I know recently there was a OJ Simpson documentary, but there's one from a long time ago where they interview Ted Lang. And I used to use this clip of his interview in my instruction to new FBI agents and support staff who were going to become members of the evidence response team unit. And he said, if someone had just done a final walkthrough, we would have found that fingerprint. And they came back 2 weeks later, supposedly found it there. So, I mean, very easy to poke holes in. Well, that was planted, but
Right.
it was documented in notes that it was seen, but it was never collected. That can happen. And that can happen if you don't do your final walkthrough, if you don't compare notes with everyone. Was this collected? Was this collected? Going through all the evidence and every bag that was it is
Yeah.
checking and rechecking.
And a good lawyer can poke holes in that sort of stuff. And actually,
Yeah.
we want them to be able to poke holes in that. We want vigorous defense for defendants. I'm a big advocate for that. We don't want to just, steamroll defendants. We want them to have a competent and good defense so that we ensure that those that are guilty are the ones that are found guilty, I guess. The
I mean, that's exactly right. That's what it's all about, making sure that the guilty pay for what they've done and the innocent don't suffer.
Yeah. Yeah. We've talked a lot about forensics so far, and I really want to talk about the side of your career, the profiling side, the behavioral analysis side of things, because in this case, we have a golden little piece of audio in the form of the 911 call that is, to my untrained ear, I, I mean it. There's so many red flags in that audio. I'm curious. I'm curious what you thought of it.
Yes, there were a lot of red flags to us as well. And again, going to not just our own experience and what would be expected under the circumstances, but also the limited research that's been done on 911 calls. It's not as extensive as the research that we looked at with the sharp force injuries, but certainly there are some problems that would suggest this is more indicative of somebody who is maybe not telling the truth or has something to hide. Not saying he's guilty, but that's what you're looking at. Is this person the guilty person who did this, or are they innocent? And yeah, there were certainly red flags. And one of the things that research has looked at is when somebody provides extraneous information. And
I was down in the, yeah,
you hear that.
yeah.
For me, I'm really careful with tone. One of my colleagues just really noted sort of his affect didn't seem right. I'm cautious with that
What does that mean?
because
His affect didn't seem right.
just he seemed a little bit flat in his, like maybe not appropriately upset or not appropriately upset at the right times and just a little
Okay.
off. And which I think anyone, even somebody who doesn't listen to a lot of 911 calls, would notice some things like that's a little strange that he said that in that moment. So just a little bit
The one thing that
hesitant.
stuck out to me was the use of the word heart when he talked about where the knife was. I mean, ignoring the whole discovery of the knife, right? I mean, I've seen the pictures. You couldn't put a neon sign and make it any more obvious that there is a knife handle coming out of her chest. But it just seemed so personal. Like I don't know that anybody would choose the word heart. She's been stabbed in her heart, as opposed to got a knife in her chest. It feels like it, and again, untrained, no bona fides here, but what it feels like is I wanted to put that knife in her heart. And then that word heart came out. Oh my goodness me, gracious, I cannot believe it. She has fallen and a knife is in her heart. It just seemed dissonant. That word seemed dissonant in
I mean,
the
it's interesting that you bring that up because we didn't even focus on that word at all. But one of my colleagues felt that some of the wounds, particularly on the front, he feels, and when you're trying to look at this scene, you're trying to determine, okay, how did this unfold? And there are different scenarios you walk through. And one of my colleagues thought the attack if we're looking at this as a homicidal attack, then the attack happens to the back, and then there's a second attack, not necessarily a long period of time in between, but there's two different attacks, and the second one to the front. And he really seemed to think that knife was just like purposely driven right into that area, and like consciously, not a frenzied attack where you don't necessarily know what you're injuring. That was his opinion
hmm.
and his interpretation. So it's interesting when you say the way you just said it. I think that's how he had viewed it, but wasn't really thinking of the word heart. We were more looking at just how the injuries presented to us. But
I
it is
like
interesting you bring that up.
well, I enjoy language. I enjoy language
I
a
do
lot.
too.
And um there are just some things that don't fit. One of This is a good example. Nobody in the real world ever. I would never like do something to harm you, Julia, or offend you, Julia, and say to you, Julia, I do apologize. Nobody says I do apologize. They say I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I apologize for what I did, right? And yet whatever, customer service agents say that all the time, and I just, oh, you don't do apologize to, it doesn't make, nobody says that. And so when I hear a phrase that is just like, oh, that hurt, no, that is not the way people speak. It really stands out to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's sometimes difficult because we don't necessarily know what his normal patterns are.
Sure.
Behaviorally, just looking at the behavior, which is, what I did for a lot of my career as well, not just all the stats here,
Yeah.
but the the app almost just real effort he puts into not acknowledging that she has an injury to her chest. There is, I mean, he's like, her head, which I found odd that he immediately goes to when she's asked, well, where is she injured or where is she bleeding from? He said, I don't know, her head. That might be leakage because nobody else knew she had the injuries to the back of her head. So that could be leakage on his part. Because you don't always know. These calls come in. You have a story, let's say. I'm just saying, let's say a guilty person has a story that they're going to tell, and they need to
Hmm.
stick to that story. They can't anticipate what all the questions are going to be, especially if they've never been in this kind of situation. So something like that, where is she bleeding from, maybe something he's not expecting. He's, I'll give him, a pass one time maybe with her head, but without noticing that she's actually bleeding from her chest. And she tells him 4 times in the call, look at her chest. At
Is
some
it
point,
going
she's
up and
saying,
down? Yeah.
is it going, she says it twice, is it going up and down, up and down? Ostensibly, he should be staring, looking at that area. And yet, so he's doing everything he can to distance himself from the injury on her chest
Tom
and look
Brennan.
everywhere else. Yeah, that's very noticeable in the call, and that was a big red flag to me because he should have ostensibly had seen it, and everything in the call is very he's distancing himself.
Well, Tom Brennan, who
Appears.
has, investigated, I think it's like 800 homicides in his career. Um, he said that because of that kind of distancing, he felt that Sam wasn't even in the room when he was on that call. He felt that there was a physical distance between Sam and the body, like he didn't want to look at it. And so he was somewhere else. He was out in the hallway or he was in his bedroom or something like that because it
Yeah,
because he thought that it just sounded like he was not anywhere near her. He
or
couldn't
looking at her.
describe, yeah, couldn't
Yeah,
describe if she was flat on the floor and that sort of
yeah.
stuff.
I would agree with that. It does seem, which is something we talk. So our analysis of the call comes out this Wednesday. So
Cool.
our full show. But that was something that we noted about it. He's not close to her, and the expected reaction, and this is what we would expect and what we have seen in other cases. A person finds their loved one injured, they rush to assist them. There's none of that going on, and that's what's great about 911 calls. I like I said, I'm cautious about determining, okay, tone, or is he really upset? Is he not really upset? Is this faking? Is it not faking? Is he for me, that's hard to tell because I do think people react differently. And I've heard some things where I'm like, that's just absolutely ridiculous. And it turns out, well, they had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
But it, the reaction, he should be right there with her. And there, you can tell that from the call that he's not. He he is not near her. He is calling from a distance. I would agree with Tom, and that's something that we all did note, and you would expect, and you expect this because in the call, Sam tells us this. She's hurt. But he doesn't know that, at least according to him in the call, that she's dead. He's saying he doesn't know. He think it's like she has to prompt him, and he's like, finally, yeah, I think so, or I have the
Yeah.
transcript somewhere. This is very loose, so I'm sure some of your listeners and viewers probably know the transcript by heart, and you might even, but he doesn't acknowledge that she's dead right away. So he's telling us he doesn't know if she's dead. So if he doesn't know, why isn't he rushing to help her? He's standing
Yeah.
at a distance. That makes no sense.
I had
That
also
makes
wondered, like, you can't hear him like trying to unzip her hoodie. You can't hear like, okay, hold on, you can't hear the of holding the phone like this while you can't hear any of that. It feels like he's, and actually I'm not saying he's guilty. I'm saying he is suspicious to me. I would say he's my number one suspect if I were investigating this. But it just doesn't feel like he is um, sincerely putting in an effort to help save his fiance. It just sounds like
Mhm.
he's doing the
And
required, trying to get police out here.
yeah, and it's it's I mean, again, statistically, he should be prioritized as the number one suspect. He found her body and he's her significant other. So, just by those factors alone, he should be prioritized as a suspect until he can be ruled out. And that would need to be done in any investigation. And so many significant others have found loved ones, you know, dead, and they've had to be investigated and they've been ruled out. And they have to be the number one suspect. There's two things working against him that he found her and he's her
Yeah.
significant other, and supposedly the last one to have seen her when she's alive. So you've got all these things that would just naturally make him the number one suspect. And as we all kind of, I don't say we all, but everyone makes the joke, the husband always did it. Boyfriend always does it,
But
right? And
statistically speaking,
yeah,
I'm sure it's
so
true. Yeah.
and you have to take with a grain of salt anything that the person who finds the body is telling you at that moment. Like you trust but verify. You take the information, but you always have to verify it because you don't know them. You don't know the situation. So just to take somebody's word for it, you really can't as an investigator. So the fact that he would fall under suspicion and be prioritized as a number one suspect is a perfectly reasonable thing to conclude until investigation shows otherwise.
What other, I guess, facets of the case stood out to you or have meaning for you in this case?
So, back to her wounds, the fact that you had a combination of incised wounds and stab wounds was significant to me. And not just, you do see incised wounds in self harm because those are often the hesitation wounds that you see,
Mm,
but you don't see them on somebody's head or their scalp.
yeah.
So that really stuck out to me. And then I think is it wound? It's either wound. I think it's K. It's also on the
Kind
back
of
of
in,
her.
yeah, in the shorn spot above her neck there. Yeah.
In a self-harm situation, those do not they just don't really align well with a self-harm. So those stood out to me. The fact that you have incised combination with stab wounds, not unheard of, but not something you see often. And the locations, the injuries to the head. The other things, the bruising to her body and the hemorrhage in her neck. Um, Probably more than anything, the hemorrhage in her neck is, I mean, that needs to be explained. That needs to be investigated. That again is not in line with a situation of self harm. It was described by Dr. Osborne in the deposition as a result of blunt force trauma. So that's important to try to determine what that could be. And blunt force could be somebody hitting or grabbing, or could be a number of things. I mean, it's difficult necessarily to really hit and fall right on your neck because it's concave,
Yeah.
so it's not necessarily an area that you see, injured because you bumped into something. So that one gave me, and then certainly the bruising on her lower arms, on her wrists. I mean, these are areas of control, and so they don't really, again, make a lot of sense in a self-harm scenario.
Mm.
They
I want to be respectful of your time here. We do have a couple of questions that I want to go through here real quick. There was one other thing that I wanted to ask you about. Now I can't remember what it was. I guess it doesn't matter. Let me bring up a couple of questions. Autumn says, "Will they still have evidence with it being ruled self harm?" Oh, that was my question. Autumn, perfect question. My question is, with the my characterization here, just the cluster of this investigation just was really, really poorly done. And I'm not putting words in your mouth. That's my opinion. Uh, is there a possibility here that criminal charges could come and that a prosecutor could get past that beyond a reasonable doubt bar, considering
I
that there's very little evidence here?
I don't know. There's more investigation that I would want to see done, whether it's been done or not. The way I kind of ended on this is that this should not, at the very least, this should be changed to undetermined. At the very least, change it to undetermined. Investigate it further. There are things they could investigate. You know, and maybe they have. And if they have, then be transparent about what the proof is of self-harm. Give that information over if you have it. So either you don't have it, you didn't find it, but there's certain things, at least as a profiler, I would want to know. I'd want to know a lot more about the fiance and his background and their relationship. There are certain questions that weren't asked of witnesses that I feel could be asked. I mean, it's been a long period of time, so people might not remember. Um, but it's a very difficult case because you don't have a lot from the crime scene.
Yeah.
So I just don't know.
I did hear Guy DeAndrea say that he wanted to bring charges when he was at the DA's office, but then left the DA's office. But
I think it would be hard. I think it I think there would be enough that a defense could bring that the same things that have made this case controversial. So I think it could be difficult to at this point. I think there'd be further investigation that needs to be done. I mean, we don't know what all was in its entirety all that was collected during the search warrant. What testing was done? Did they? It was hard. I was going to say, did they take the sink traps to see if blood was washed off, things like that? But that might not help much since the crime scene cleanup team went in there and they were
right,
probably dumping things down the drain. But what items of evidence did they collect and could they be tested? I certainly would be interested in the stains that were noted on the pillows. That that would be an interesting. I don't know if that in and of itself would get people to the point of
right.
wanting to bring any charges, but
JC says, curious if you have an opinion on the Karen Reed case. I think we just opened a can. I think a can of worms was just opened. But you live in Boston.
I do. I mean, I do live in Boston, and I'm going to say I don't comment on that case, and I will explain why. As I said, I used to work public corruption. It is my old squad
Ah,
that investigated that. I don't have any inside information, but because of my connection to that squad, of course, it's been many years since I was on that squad, but I appreciate the question. I am following the case, but I just don't comment just
that's a
because I
good,
have I
yeah, it's
have
good
a
policy.
very
Yeah, that's a good policy.
Mhm.
I have covered Karen Reed a couple times on both sides of the, I guess, theory spectrum. And boy, does it bring out the emotions in people.
Yeah. I mean,
Really does.
I see the question about the blizzard. I think that's a
Yeah.
general question I could probably answer. I think it probably played a significant part. It is very difficult to process a crime scene when you're dealing with those kinds of elements. It's not impossible. You try to put up tents, but it
Oh,
is very difficult when you're trying. I'm assuming they're talking about the Karen Reed
they
blizzard and
weren't, but I'm glad that you're saying this. That they
oh,
were asking about Ellen, but no,
the
this is
blizzard.
great because a lot of the in the Karen Reed case, a lot of the I don't know, bad feelings toward the police were just, I don't know, the red Solo cups and the all those little details.
Yeah.
but I'm
But
sure
yeah.
working in those conditions is probably pretty hard.
Oh, yeah. So I think that could play a role in sorry, I was thinking about the Karen
No,
Reed
that's
case.
okay.
That was also a blizzard, but, that is one thing w w we briefly discussed. Was it that it was a blizzard, and it was a snowy day, and it was like, "We gotta get out of here"? I don't know. I
I'd
don't
wondered
know.
about that because a nor'easter like that, I don't know if you've experienced one since you've lived up in the Northeast. Have you?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it'll shut down a city and it will become very, very difficult to move around. And I've thought that a time or two in Ellen's case where the guys were just like, I got to get out of here if I'm ever going to get home.
Yeah. Well,
Let's
we
move
had a
this along.
disastrous one. I'm trying to think how maybe it had been 2008 or 9 or something like that, and it was, I mean, people who lived, like, let's say 10 miles from the office, it took them 8 hours to get home. That's how
Yeah.
bad. It was one of those blizzards. That was probably the worst one that I can remember. But, yeah, I mean, maybe it factored in. I don't know, because I don't know what their procedures would be if, if they do have what they determined to be a suicide. Would this be something that they would not have treated like a regular crime scene normally? I don't know.
Yeah, I wonder. I've been told that in Manayunk that it's an area that had not had a homicide for, I mean, close to 2 decades. That crew hadn't investigated a homicide in that precinct. This is, I think it was Tom Brennan who told me this. Just like, it just doesn't
Mhm.
happen there. So maybe it wasn't the A team that was there that night. But I mean, we do kind of have to. I try to just be as devil's advocate as I can. That's the worst. I tried to turn that into an
Yeah.
adjective, but
And I just don't understand. There's no part of me that understands how they could be so certain that was self-harm on that night, and I don't there's nothing about that scene, even if you had, like, thought, like, well, maybe she could have because of what the witnesses are saying, or the fiance saying, possibly, but I just don't understand, like, that you wouldn't even say, I can't take that as at face value at all. I have to treat this as a crime scene."
so where can people listen to the consult?
Anywhere they get podcasts, The Consult, Real FBI Profilers. We have about over 70 episodes now, and
Nice.
we do cases. We've done cases that we've worked on. We've done cases we haven't worked on. And when I say worked on, we worked back in the behavioral analysis unit. We talk about solved and unsolved cases, and because of all the time and energy that goes into one consult,
Yeah.
I like to supplement my show with interviews. I started to do that with people that I think can help us better understand certain things that we look at in the work that we do. So so we have a variety
Yeah.
of types of cases. Some I have a passion for lesser known cold cases that people don't know about. Those are really meaningful for me to do.
Well, yeah. So everybody go and take a listen. I think you have. Last time I checked, which I mean, in full transparency, was a couple days ago, but you had 2 episodes on Ellen that were already there. You're
Yes.
saying that in a couple days your third one's going to drop.
Yes.
So go check them out, guys. They're thoughtful. They are I guess purposeful. Everything really does follow a good purposeful manner of investigation. I really appreciated that.
Yeah,
It's
we
very
get right
organized.
to business. It's exactly what you would hear if you were sitting in the room at the FBI's BAU.
Okay, so I've got a case that I want to tell you about offline
You
that
got it.
that you're going to want to listen to. I think, and in this case, I have a giant case file that I can share with you.
Oh,
So hang out
music
just a
to my
minute if you
ears.
can, okay? While I sign us off, and then and then I'll be right back with you. Julia, thank you for joining me tonight. That was
Thank you,
awesome.
Gavin, for having me.
Okay, guys. So, no like major sign off or anything here, but do go and check out the consult. It's I listen to it on Apple Podcasts. You can get it anywhere, and it really is fun for a person like me to listen to. I like the organized method that they go about doing that. Check that out. Tomorrow we are going to be back with you. Actually, tomorrow, guys, we are going to be circling back around to the case that started my live streaming journey, and that is the case of Gabby Petito. I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that have come out since the Netflix docu-series dropped. I have watched all 3 episodes. It is terrific. I really deeply applaud the Petito family and the Schmidt family for what they did during a very trying time in their lives, and they have turned it into meaningful action to so many other families. So we're going to talk about that tomorrow. Join me at 7:30 p.m. With that, I will bid you adieu. Thank you very much for being here. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you liked what you saw, please consider subscribing. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below.